You're looking at the woman who sent her own husband to prison. And I swear to you, this whole nightmare, this entire tangled web of lies that spanned a decade, it all unraveled because I bought the wrong shampoo. I know how that sounds. It sounds insane, like something out of a movie. But my life, the one I thought was so perfect, was more twisted than anything Hollywood could dream up. Before all this, I was Dr. Isabella Rossi. My name meant something in New York. It meant one of the best plastic surgeons on Park Avenue. It meant a spectacular penthouse overlooking Central Park, charity galas where my picture was always taken, and a husband, Liam Vance, who was so charming, so brilliant. He could make anyone feel like the most important person in the room. Our life was polished. It was weekends in the Hamptons and spontaneous trips to Paris. It was the kind of life people look at from the outside and call a fairy tale. And for 10 years, I believed it was. But every fairy tale has a strange little detail, doesn't it? Ours was Liam's shampoo, a ridiculously expensive, artisanal sandalwood brand. He was obsessed with it. It was his scent. He'd always say, with that easy smile of his, that it was the only thing that made him feel grounded. He made it my job to make sure we never, ever ran out. A small, simple request in our otherwise perfect life. What I'm about to tell you is the story of how that mistake, running out of his precious shampoo, exposed a lie so it nearly destroyed me. It's the story of how I discovered the man I shared my bed with was a complete stranger, and how I had to become someone I never imagined I could be to survive. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about how I took back my life. This is a long and painful story, and I'll need a friend to see it. To be sure you hear how it all ends, you can follow my story right here. That way, you won't miss the next part. It all started on a Tuesday. I remember the day so clearly because it was just so ordinary. My morning was a blur of consultations and pre-op meetings at the clinic, the kind of controlled chaos I thrive on. On my way out, my assistant reminded me about a dinner reservation, and it was like a tiny pinprick in my memory bubble. Shampoo, Liam's sandalwood shampoo. I'd forgotten to reorder it online. It was a total brain fart moment, nothing more. I mentally cursed, knowing how particular he was, but I was already running late. I ducked into this chic, upscale pharmacy on Madison Avenue, the kind that smells like $1 million the second you walk in. I scanned the shelves, and my eyes landed on a new men's line everyone was raving about. Heavy, beautiful glass bottle, sleek black label, with notes of bergamota and cedar. It smelled incredible, sophisticated, powerful. I thought, he's going to love this. It's an upgrade. I paid an obscene amount for it without a second thought, and went on with my day, feeling like I'd dodged a small domestic bullet. That night, our penthouse was quiet. The city lights twinkled below like scattered diamonds. I was on my second glass of wine when I heard his keys in the door. Liam was home from his 2-day business trip to Boston. He walked in, looking tired but handsome as ever in his tailored suit. He dropped his briefcase, pulled me into his arms, and gave me that He told me the trip was a success, but draining, and that all he wanted was a long, hot shower to wash the day off. I watched him walk toward our master suite, and I felt that little hum of contentment This was my life. This was our home. Everything was I heard the water start, the muffled sound echoing through the apartment. I swirled the wine in my glass, thinking about the weekend we could get away to the Hamptons. About 10 minutes later, the water shut off. And then, silence. A few more minutes. It was then that he walked out of the bedroom, a white towel slung low on his hips, his hair still dripping. His easy smile was gone. His face was a mask of pure, undiluted. His eyes were wide, darting around the room before they landed on me. My first instinct was to laugh. I thought he was being dramatic. He had the nerve to ask me, his voice tight and trembling, "Isabella, what is this? What did you do with my shampoo?" I just smiled, taking a sip of my wine. "It ran out, honey," I said, my tone light. "I bought you a new one. It's even better, don't you think?" But he wasn't looking at me anymore. His gaze was fixed on the bathroom doorway like a monster was about to come out of it. And the look on his face, it wasn't irritation, it wasn't annoyance, it was sheer, absolute terror. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I need that smell, that specific one." Before I could even process what was happening, he was moving past me, frantically into the kitchen. He yanked open the trash can and started digging through it like a man possessed. My heart started a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I watched, completely frozen as he pulled out the empty, dark amber bottle of his sandalwood shampoo. He clutched it in his hand, and his whole body seemed to sag with a strange mix of relief and despair. He went white as a sheet. That was the moment, the first crack in the perfect facade of our 10-year marriage. He tried to play it off, of course. He came back into the living room, forcing a shaky laugh. He told me he was sorry, that the trip had just been incredibly stressful, that he was just being weird and particular. He apologized for overreacting, but the apology felt hollow, rehearsed. He couldn't quite meet my eyes, and I saw the one not clutching the empty bottle was still trembling slightly. I just nodded, pretending to accept it, but a cold, sharp alarm bell was screaming in my mind. This wasn't about a scent preference. This wasn't a quirk. This was a reaction so primal, so full of fear, that it could only be tied to something much, much bigger. That night, for the first time in 10 years, I lay awake next to my husband and realized I was sleeping next to a stranger. And his terror had absolutely nothing to do with shampoo. The days following the shampoo incident were a masterclass in gaslighting, and I was the star pupil. Liam was perfect, almost unnervingly so. He was more loving, constantly telling me how much he appreciated me. He chalked up his meltdown, as he called it, to burnout from work and swore it would never happen again. The old me, the trusting me from 2 weeks ago, would have believed him. I would have felt guilty for even doubting him. But I couldn't shake the image of that raw terror on his face. It was like a ghost that haunted every room of our apartment. And once you start looking for ghosts, you see them everywhere. I started noticing the little things, the tiny cracks I'd papered over for years, the way he always placed his phone screen down on the nightstand. A habit I once thought was about him being present. Now, it felt like a deliberate act of concealment. The business calls he'd take out on the terrace, closing the heavy glass door behind his voice, a low, indecipherable. I used to think it was just him being considerate. Now, my gut was screaming that it was secrecy. His travel schedule, which I'd always seen as a testament to his ambition, now seemed like a patchwork of holes and inconsistencies. Where did he really go? Who was he really meeting? Living in my own home started to feel like I was an intruder, tiptoeing around a life that was no longer mine to fully see. The paranoia was eating me alive. After another week of this silent torture, of smiling through fancy dinners while my insides were twisted in knots, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called my best friend, Chloe. Chloe isn't just a friend, she's a weapon. She's one of the most ruthless divorce attorneys in New York City. She's seen every lie, every trick, every form of betrayal imaginable. I remember my hand shaking as I dialed her number, feeling this profound sense. I was Dr. Isabella Rossi. My life was perfect. I didn't have these kinds of problems. I told her everything, my voice barely a whisper. The shampoo, the panic, the phone, the terrace. I was half expecting her to tell me I was being crazy, that I was letting stress get to me. Instead, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said, her voice devoid of all emotion, "Bella, I'm sending you a number. He's a private investigator. The best. He's discreet, and he will find whatever there is to find. Call him." There was no judgment. In that moment, I was so grippy. I couldn't meet for 2 days, and I couldn't just sit. I felt this desperate, urgent need to do something. That night, after Liam was sound asleep, his breathing deepens, I slipped out of bed and my heart was hammering against my ribs. It felt so wrong. But the need to know was stronger than the guilt. I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen lighting up my face in the dark, and logged into our joint credit card account. My fingers trembled as I typed in the password. I scrolled through months of statements, my eyes scanning for the cliches. Exorbitant charges at Tiffany's, unexplained hotel bills in Boston, lingerie stores. But there was nothing like that. It was all disappointingly normal. Charges from restaurants we went to together, my shopping sprees, his suits. I started to feel a wave of relief mixed with foolishness. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Chloe was wrong. And then I saw it. It was a small charge, just over $100, at a place called Scarsdale Gourmet Market. I frowned. Scarsdale? It's a quiet, beautiful, incredibly wealthy suburb about an hour north of the city. We had no friends there, no reason to go. I scrolled back further. There it was again, the week before, and the week before that. It was a weekly charge every single Tuesday for the last 6 months. My blood ran cold, Next to it, on the same day every week, was another charge. A gas station, a specific Shell station just off the Hutchinson River Parkway, the main artery to Scarsdale. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was a routine, a ritual. He wasn't just cheating. Cheating is secret hotels and fancy dinners in the city. This was grocery, a weekly trip to the supermarket in a town we'd never been to. And in that moment, staring at the glowing screen in the dead of night, I knew with an ice-cold certainty that my husband wasn't just hiding an affair. He was hiding a whole other life. Those 2 days of waiting for the private investigator were the longest of my life. I was living inside a pressure cooker, pretending everything was normal on the surface while a storm of suspicion raged inside me. Every interaction with Liam was a performance. I smiled when he kissed me goodbye, asked about his day when he came home, and lay beside him in bed, feigning sleep, my body rigid with tension. He was completely oblivious, wrapped up in his usual charm, which now felt slimy and false. The man I was looking at was a stranger, and I was just waiting for the proof. The PI, a gruff ex-cop named Mark, was as discreet as Chloe had promised. He just texted me a time at an intersection on the Upper West Side. "Be there in 5, gray sedan." I was there. He pulled up, rolled down the passenger window, and handed me a thick, plain manila envelope. He didn't say a word, just looked at me with a kind of pity in his eyes that made my stomach churn. I took the envelope, and the weight of it felt like a slab of concrete in my hands. This was it. The point of no return. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I just drove aimlessly for a while until I found myself parked by the Hudson River, the gray water churning below. I sat there in the driver's seat, the engine off, the silence in the car deafening. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely unlock the little metal clasp on the envelope. A part of me was screaming not to open it, to throw it in the river and go back to my beautiful, polished life and pretend I never found those grocery bills. But I knew I couldn't. I had to see them, no matter how ugly. I slid the contents out. It wasn't a document. It was a stack of glossy 8x10 photographs. The first one stole the air from my lungs. It was Liam, my Liam. He was in a sun-drenched backyard, wearing a simple polo shirt and jeans I'd never seen before. He was smiling, a wide, genuine, carefree smile as he pushed a little girl on a swing. She couldn't have been more than 5, with bright blonde pigtails, laughing with her head thrown back. I felt a wave of nausea. I flipped to the next photo. It was a barbecue. Liam was at the grill, flipping burgers. A woman, pretty, with a kind face and warm eyes, was standing next to him, her hand resting on his back. They looked perfect. Like a magazine ad for the American, photo after photo documented this life I never knew existed. A family trip to a pumpkin patch, the little girl building a snowman, Liam and this other woman, Sarah, holding hands on a porch swing. My world didn't just crack, it detonated. Underneath the photos was the report, typed in a cold, emotionless font. It laid out the facts with brutal efficiency. The other woman was Sarah Peterson. The daughter was Lily. And in the idyllic suburb of Scarsdale, Liam Vance, my husband, the brilliant investment consultant, did not exist. There, he was Mark Peterson, a work-from-home architect. He had a completely separate legal identity, a different driver's license, social security number, everything. The beautiful colonial house, the family SUV in the driveway, all registered to Mark and Sarah Peterson. And then I saw the sentence in the report that made everything click into place with a horrifying, sickening snap. Subject maintains a consistent personal routine, including the use of a specific sandalwood-scented grooming product, noted by surveillance. The shampoo. It wasn't my smell. It was their smell. It was the scent of Daddy coming home from a long day of work. The bergamot and cedar I'd bought would have been an alien scent in that house. It would have raised questions. A simple, innocent question from a 5-year-old girl. Daddy, why do you smell different? Could have brought his entire house of cards crashing down. His panic hadn't been about me discovering a lie. It had been about him failing to maintain it for them. I wasn't the wife he was afraid of losing. I was the complication he was afraid of being caught by. I sat there for what felt like hours, a ghost in my own life, mourning a marriage that had the tears I expect. Instead, something rose up in their place. He hadn't just broken, he had tried to break me, and as I carefully placed the photos of his other happy, made a silent promise. He had no idea who he had just declared war on. Walking back into that penthouse was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. The moment I stepped through the door, air felt different, thin and cold. The life we had built here, the memories that soaked these walls, they all felt like a lie. Our wedding photo on the mantle, us smiling in Italy, it was like looking at two actors in a play. I ran my hand over the cool marble of the kitchen island where we'd drunk countless bottles of wine, laughing about our day. It just felt like a stage, and my role was about to change. I had a few hours before he was due home, and I used every second to build my mask. I splashed my face with cold water, reapplied my makeup with surgical precision, and arranged my features into a placid, calm expression. When I looked in the mirror, Rossi looked back, but behind her eyes a stranger was staring out, someone calculating and cold. When Liam walked in, I was ready. He came over and kissed me, and I had to fight every muscle in my body not to recoil. His touch felt like ice, his familiar scent a toxic reminder of his lies. He asked how my day was, and the words, "Fine, just a long day at the clinic," came out of my mouth so naturally it almost scared me. I became an observer in my own life, watching myself go through the motions. I asked about his day, feigning interest in his fabricated meetings and deals. I listened to him lie to my face, smoothly and effortlessly. And I just nodded and smiled, all while the photos of his other family were burning a hole in my mind. Every word he said was a clear gesture, a tell. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his interrogator, and he had no idea the session had already begun. For the next week, I played the part of the devoted, unsuspecting wife. I was patient. I was observant. I needed him to be completely at ease, to believe his fortress of lies was impenetrable. Then, one evening, as we were having dinner on the terrace, the city lights a glittering tapestry below us, I saw my opening. We were talking about the future, a topic he usually loved. I mentioned, in an offhand way, that a colleague of mine was selling their Hamptons house and buying a bigger place. "It got me thinking," I said, swirling the Chardonnay in my glass. "Maybe we should look at upgrading our place out there in a year or two." I was watching his face for a split second. I saw it again. A flicker of that same panic I saw over the... It was gone almost instantly, replaced by his usual charming smile. He told me it was a great idea, but that maybe we should hold off on any big real estate moves. And then he made his first mistake. Thinking he was managing my expectations, he told me, "Actually, it's funny you mention it. I'm restructuring some of our major investments right now. We're going to need to be much more liquid over the next couple of months for a big portfolio shift I'm planning. It's a huge opportunity." But the timing, the old Isabella, that would have sounded responsible. Brilliant, even. My husband, the financial genius, making smart moves for our future. But to the new Isabella, the words hit me like a series of alarm bells. Restructuring, liquid, portfolio shift. He wasn't planning for our future. He was planning his exit. He was converting our hard-earned, long-term assets tied to my clinic's success, my name, my credit, into cash. Cash that could be moved, cash that could disappear overnight. He was preparing to run. I just smiled and told him it sounded brilliant and that I trusted him completely. He leaned back in his chair looking smug and satisfied, completely convinced of my ignorance. He had no idea what he had just done. He thought he was just making small talk about our finances, reassuring his clueless wife. But in that one careless sentence, he didn't just reveal his strategy. He handed me the blueprint to his own destruction. And I knew exactly who to show it to. The next morning, I walked into Chloe's office feeling like a soldier heading into a war room. Her firm was on the 50th floor of a steel and glass tower downtown, a place that screamed power and had zero warmth, which was exactly what I needed. I placed the manila envelope on her vast mahogany desk, right next to the little tidbit of information Liam had so carelessly given me. "He's liquidating," I said, my voice flat. He called it a portfolio shift. Chloe didn't even flinch. She leaned back in her leather chair, a predator sensing blood in the water. She confirmed everything I suspected. A portfolio shift like that wasn't about growth. It was about speed. It was about turning everything solid, stocks, bonds, real estate holdings, into untraceable cash. An exit strategy, she told me in her blunt, surgical way. "Bella, the PI was for finding the other woman. What you're describing now is grand larceny. We're past private eyes. We need a forensic accountant, someone who can follow the money, because right now, all that money is flowing away from you." She made one phone call. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a sterile conference room with a man named Arthur. He was the complete antithesis of Where Liam was tall, charming, and charismatic, Arthur was small, quiet, and wore glasses so thick they made his eyes look huge. He didn't shake my hand, he just gave a slight nod. He looked like he was more comfortable with spreadsheets than people. Chloe had told me he was a bloodhound with numbers. If Liam had moved a single penny he shouldn't have, Arthur would find it. Giving him access to my life's work was profoundly violating. I typed in the passwords to my clinic's business accounts, my personal this empire I had built with my own my sweat and my sleepless nights. I was now handing it over to a stranger to sift through the wreckage. For the next week, I continued the charade at home, a sickeningly sweet performance of a loving wife. Every smile felt like a crack in my own face. Every shared dinner tasted like ash. Liam was more relaxed than ever, convinced he was nearing the finish line of his great escape, which made his lies even more prolific and my role even harder to play. Then Arthur called. The three of us met again in the same conference room. Arthur laid out a series of binders on the table. He didn't start with the present. He started 10 years ago, right after Liam and I were married, and he began to tell me the real story of my marriage. Liam's investment consultancy was a sham, a shell corporation set up with the sole purpose of laundering money. My money. For years, he had been systematically overbilling my clinic for consulting fees, forging my signature to take out massive business loans against my clinic's assets, and funneling the profits into accounts under the name Mark Peterson. The scale of it was breathtaking. Millions. But that wasn't the plot twist. That was just the method. The real twist, the knife he'd plunged into my back before I even knew him, was the motive. Arthur had dug into Liam's life before me. It turned out Liam Vance was already a failure. He'd been involved in a disastrous tech startup that went bankrupt, leaving him with crushing debt and angry investors. He didn't meet me and fall in love. He met me and saw a lifeline. He saw a successful, trusting woman whose thriving business and impeccable credit could be the engine to fund his escape plan. Sarah Peterson wasn't some new woman he fell for. The records showed they'd been together long before I was in the picture. She was part of the life he had to flee. I always thought our story began 10 years ago, on a rainy night in a Soho art gallery. But as Arthur laid out the cold, hard numbers, I understood. Our story didn't begin there. My part in his story began the moment he realized my success could pay for his failures. I wasn't his wife. I was his salvation, his getaway car. And he'd been driving me straight into a wall from the very... I left that conference room with Arthur and Chloe feeling strangely calm. Horror of the revelation that I was a mark, a 10-year-long con, was so absolute, so vast, that it had burned away all the lesser emotion. There was no more grief, no more confusion. All that was left was a diamond-hard clarity. My husband was a professional thief, and I was the job he was about to finish. The question was no longer, how could he do this to me? The question was, how do I stop him? Back in Chloe's office, the three of us formed a silent council of war. Arthur laid out the timeline. Based on the liquidation of assets, he estimated Liam, or whatever his real name was less than 2 weeks away from his endgame. The final move would be a massive wire transfer, consolidating all the stolen funds from the various accounts into one offshore account, from which he would vanish forever, leaving me in a crater of debt. Chloe explained the options. We could go to the police now, but a complex white-collar crime investigation would take time. It might spook him, and he could bolt with whatever he could grab. We don't want to just stop him, Chloe said, her eyes glinting. We want to annihilate him. We let him make his move. We just make sure we're the ones who catch the ball. That's when the real plan began to form. We weren't just going to block the transfer. We were going to hijack it. To do that, we needed an ally with more power than a PI or an accountant. We needed the bank. Chloe's reputation preceded her. A single phone call from her, mentioning imminent multi-million-dollar wire fraud concerning your client, Dr. Isabella Rossi, got us a next-day, off-the-books meeting with the senior vice president of the bank's fraud and risk division. Her name was Evelyn Albright, a woman in her 60s with immaculately styled silver hair and an aura of absolute authority. We met in a silent, wood-paneled boardroom that felt more like a vault than an office. I let Arthur do the talking. I was the emotional centerpiece, the wronged wife, but he was the voice of cold, hard facts. He didn't tell a story, he presented a case. He spread his binders on the polished table, and with a quiet, methodical voice, he walked Mrs. Albright through a decade of deception. He showed her the shell corporation, the forged loan applications bearing my signature, the systematic siphoning of my clinic's revenue, and the network of accounts under the name Mark Peterson. I watched Mrs. Albright's face. She started with a look of professional, detached concern. As Arthur continued, her expression hardened. I could see the moment she stopped seeing this as a messy domestic dispute and started seeing it as a brazen attack on her institution. Liam hadn't just defrauded me, he had used her bank as his personal tool. She was personally offended. When Arthur was finished, she didn't offer condolences. She offered a solution. "Mr. Vance is planning a grand finale," she said, her voice like ice. "So we'll give him one." She explained the plan. It was brilliant. They wouldn't block his transfer. Instead, when he initiated the wire to his offshore account, their internal systems would be programmed to automatically intercept it. The system would send him a confirmation receipt, making him believe the money was gone, on its way to his new life. But the funds would be instantly rerouted to a new, secure, and legally shielded trust account. An account that was in my name, and my name alone. I walked out of that bank and onto the busy streets of Manhattan, but the city noise sounded distant. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the victim reacting to his crimes. I was the architect of his downfall. He was at home, probably sipping a scotch and smiling, thinking he was the smartest man in the world, the master puppeteer about to cut the strings. He was getting ready to press send on a transaction he thought would be his victory lap, completely unaware that the real recipient was me. With the financial trap set and the bank waiting silently in the wings, a strange sense of calm settled over me. Part 1 of the plan was complete. The money, my life's work, was protected. But sitting in my pristine, silent apartment, I knew it wasn't enough. I didn't just want my money back. I wanted justice. A quiet arrest in the dead of night wouldn't cut it. Him disappearing into the federal prison system with a sanitized press release was too. He had lived his life as a performance, charming and fooling the entire world. I decided his downfall had to be a performance too. And it had to have an audience. I discussed it with Chloe. She agreed. "He built his reputation in public," she said, her voice sharp. "We're going to demolish it in public. We need a stage." The answer was right in front of me, literally. I was pacing through my living room when my eyes fell on our digital calendar, glowing on the kitchen counter. There it was, circled in digital red, Annual Pediatric Wing Charity Gala. Our gala. The one I founded and he so graciously co-hosted every year. It was the crown jewel of our social calendar, a night where the titans of New York finance, art, and medicine would gather in our home, drink our champagne, and write 7-figure checks to my charity. It was the night Liam was at his most brilliant, gliding through the crowd, his arm around my waist, the perfect, supportive philanthropist husband. It was his favorite stage, and in 2 weeks, it was going to be his execution ground. The idea hit me with the force of a lightning bolt. I called Chloe immediately. "I have the stage," I told her. "The gala. It's here, in our home." I could almost hear the wicked smile forming on her face through the phone. She called it poetically brutal. The plan was no longer just about financial recovery. It now had a second, equally important prong, utter social annihilation. But even that felt to do more than just expose him to a room full of strangers. I wanted to shatter his world, both of them, at the exact same time. That night I pulled out the PI's envelope and looked at the photos of Sarah Peterson. Her smile was serene, trusting. She was a victim in this as much as I was, just a different kind. Her presence at the gala would be the one variable he could never anticipate, the one ghost he would never expect to see. Her seeing him as Liam Vance, the high society husband, would be the final devastating blow. But how to get her there? A direct invitation was impossible, so Chloe and I did what we now did best. We devised a lie. A beautiful and intricate one. We used the charity's official letterhead. We designed a gorgeous, embossed invitation. We created a special, one-time-only Community Hero Award. We crafted a letter informing a Mrs. Sarah Peterson of Scarsdale that she had been selected at random from a list of community supporters to receive this honor. The prize was an all-expenses-paid evening of glamour in Manhattan for 2 at our exclusive gala. We even suggested, in delicate script, that she could make it a surprise for her hard-working husband. We made it an offer no one living a quiet suburban life could possibly refuse. A fairy tale night in the city. 2 days later, I drove to a post office in Queens, a place I never go, wearing a hat and sunglasses like a spy in a cheap movie. As I dropped the heavy, cream-colored envelope into the mailbox, I knew this was the point of no return. The financial trap was a safety net. This was the blade. I wasn't just taking back my money anymore. I was about to take back my story, and I was going to do it in front of everyone he ever fooled, including the other woman he'd built his lies upon. The final week before the gala was a surreal blur. The RSVP card from Scarsdale arrived, confirming attendance for one Sarah Peterson, feminine script. Seeing it lying on the antique silver tray with all the other RSVPs from the city's elite, dizzying sense of power. The last piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. Our penthouse was a whirlwind of activity. Caterers mapped out the serving stations, florists filled the rooms with towering arrangements of white lilies that smelled faintly of a funeral, and the event staff polished every surface until it gleamed. The entire apartment was being transformed into a glittering stage, all for a single final performance. Liam was absolutely in his element. He thrived on this kind of social pressure. To him, this party was the final victory lap of his old life. He was glowing, effusive, more charming than ever. I watched him approve the champagne selection and finalize the seating chart, completely absorbed in the fantasy he was about to leave behind. The irony was so thick I could taste it. He'd hold up 2 different silk ties and ask for my opinion on which one better projected elegant host, and I would smile and choose one, all while thinking about which would look better with a pair of handcuffs. He was a dead man walking, and he was spending his final hours picking out his own funeral attire. The day before the party, however, I saw the first crack in his perfect composure. I was walking past his home office when I heard his voice. It was low and tight, laced with an irritation I hadn't heard in a long time. He was on the phone, pacing. He was speaking about a compliance delay on a transfer. He mentioned the bank was asking for additional verification, and his voice dripped with contempt for the inconvenience. It was clear he was talking to a financial partner in his scheme. He was trying to sound in control, but the stress was evident. The pressure of his own timeline was getting to him. Mrs. Albright at the bank was playing her part beautifully, applying just enough friction to make him sweat. He wasn't the calm, cool master manipulator. He was a cornered rat getting nervous, and it was a beautiful thing to witness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself in my dressing room, looking at my reflection in the large vanity. Thought about the woman I was 10 years ago, before ambitious, a little naive, fiercely. I had built a surgical practice from scratch in the most competitive city in the world. I was a force. And somehow, I had let this man, this mirage, diminish that. He hadn't just stolen my money, he had stolen my confidence in my own judgment. The woman looking back, it wasn't that naive girl anymore. The softness was gone. My eyes held a cold, hard resolve that I barely recognized. The afternoon of the gala arrived. My dress was laid out on the bed, a sheath of crimson silk, a declaration of war. I could hear the murmur of the staff in the main rooms, the clink of glasses, the soft strains of the string quartet warming up. The curtain was about to rise. As I fastened a diamond necklace around my neck, one he had given me for our anniversary, a bauble bought with my own money, I took one last look at myself. He thought tonight was about celebrating our success. He thought it was about charity. He had no idea that every guest arriving, every glass of champagne being poured, was a prelude to the end of his world. I wasn't just hosting a party, I was hosting a reckoning. And I was ready. I descended the grand staircase into a sea of familiar faces, the air thick with expensive perfume, and the low hum of powerful people making small talk. The room glittered, crystal glasses, diamond jewelry, and the shimmering skyline of Manhattan visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Liam was waiting for me at the bottom, his eyes shining with pride. He took my hand, raised it to his lips, and told me I had never looked more beautiful. He was right. I was wearing my crimson war paint, and I had never felt more powerful. He guided me into the crowd, his arm possessively around my waist, and for the next hour, we played our parts to perfection. We were the hosts, the power couple, the picture of success. All the while, my heart was a cold, steady metronome, counting down the seconds. I smiled, I laughed, I accepted compliments on the decor, but my eyes kept drifting to the entrance, scanning, waiting. And then I saw her. Sarah Peterson. She was standing hesitantly just inside the doorway, clutching a small beaded purse, looking utterly and completely lost. She was pretty, in a wholesome, girl-next-door way that was jarringly out of place among the surgically perfected and couture-clad women in the room. Her dress was nice, but it was no match for the sea of designer gowns. She was a goldfish in a tank of sharks, and my husband had thrown her there. Before Liam, who was deep in conversation with a hospital board member, could turn and see her, I excused myself. I glided through the crowd, my red dress parting the sea of black tuxedos. I reached her and gave her my warmest smile. I introduced myself as Isabella, the hostess. I thanked her for coming all the way from Scarsdale to support our cause. She was flustered, starstruck, and utterly disarmed. She told me what an honor it was, how she couldn't believe she'd won. I told her the honor was all mine and that we had a special tribute for our community heroes later in the evening. I guided her to a spot near the side of the room, a place with a perfect view of the stage we had set up, and told her to enjoy the shampoo. Heart ached for the humiliation she was about to endure. She was collateral damage in a war she didn't even know was being fought. Finally, the moment came. The lights dimmed slightly. Liam walked to the small stage, basking in the applause. He gave a charming, funny speech, thanking everyone for their generosity. Then he turned. He spoke about my passion, my brilliance, my dedication. He called me his inspiration. The crowd was captivated. Then he gestured for me. I walked up, took the microphone from his hand, our fingers brushing for the last time. I started calmly. I thanked our guests. I spoke of the children the new wing would save. The room was silent, hanging on my every word. I looked out at the sea of faces. Then I turned my gaze to my husband, who was standing beside me, and, of course, I said, my voice clear and steady, I'd like to give a special thank you to my husband, Liam Vance, the pillar of my success. The room erupted in applause. Liam gave a modest nod. I waited for the sound to die down. However, a blade of ice in my voice, I recently discovered that my husband has an incredible, hidden talent for multitasking. So talented, in fact, that he can manage 2 entire lives. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Liam's smile faltered. He's so talented, I went on, my eyes locked on his, that he also answers to the name of Mark Peterson. As I spoke the name, a giant projector screen descended silently from a hidden recess in the ceiling behind us. The first image that flashed onto it, 10 feet high, was the photo. Liam, in his polo shirt and jeans, pushing a laughing little girl on a swing in a sunny suburban backyard. A collective, audible gasp sucked the air out of the room. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched Liam's face. The color drained from it as if a plug had been pulled. His confident smile froze, then shattered, replaced by a mask of pure, horrified. The slideshow continued with a cold, brutal rhythm. Liam and Sarah at the barbecue, the family at the pumpkin patch. Then, the evidence. Arthur had turned the dry financial data into a masterpiece of graphic, simple, damning charts showing millions flowing from the Rossi Clinic to a shell corporation. My forged signature on a loan document, highlighted in blood red, next to my real one. The final graphic was 2 maps side by side, one of Manhattan, with our penthouse circled, labeled Liam's Investor. The other of Scarsdale, with his colonial house circled, labeled Mark's Home. My gaze flickered into the crowd and found Sarah. I saw the moment her reality broke, flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a pain and betrayal so profound it felt like a physical blow. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. 2 strangers united in the same devastating. Liam didn't make a sound. He just stood there, trapped in the spotlight between the 2 lives I had just fused together with fire and light. As chaos began to bubble up, with people whispering and pointing, 2 of the caterers, who were actually Chloe's discreetly hired security guards, moved calmly to the stage and stood on either side of him. He just stood there, trapped in the spotlight of his own lies. The truth was hanging in the air, captured on that giant screen for everyone to see. There was a moment of absolute silence in that room of 100 people, a silence so profound it was louder than any scream. And in that silence, I saw him for what he truly was. Not a monster, but just a small, hollow man whose elaborate stage had just collapsed beneath his feet. The aftermath of the explosion was a strange, muffled chaos. My beautiful penthouse, which seconds before had been the pinnacle of New York elegance, was now a crime scene of whispers and shocked faces. I saw Liam being led away, his face a blank mask of ruin, not even looking at me. I saw Sarah across the room, being gently guided toward a private exit by one of Chloe's people, her body shaking with sobs. She was a ghost at a feast that had turned into a public execution. I felt no triumph, no surge of victory, just the vast, quiet emptiness that comes after a long and brutal war is finally over. The fight was done. The consequences for Liam were as swift and brutal as Chloe had timed the police arrival to the second. They were waiting in the lobby, and he was arrested quietly for fraud as soon as he stepped off the elevator. His public humiliation was so absolute that not a single one of his powerful friends lifted a finger to help him. The trial was a media sensation, but for the prosecution, it was an open and shut case. With the mountain of financial evidence Arthur had compiled and the devastating testimony of a heartbroken Sarah Peterson confirming his double life, he didn't stand a chance. He was convicted on a laundry list of charges: grand larceny, wire fraud, identity theft, even bigamy. The judge gave him a sentence that ensured he wouldn't be charming his way through another woman's life for a very, very long time. Financially, I was made whole. The bank, my silent, powerful ally, had captured every last cent of his final transfer. The assets he had acquired as Mark Peterson, the house in Scarsdale, the SUV, the secret investment portfolio, were all proven to have been purchased with my stolen money. They were seized and liquidated, and every dollar was returned to me. The first thing I did was sell the penthouse. I couldn't stand to be in that glass box of lies for another minute. I took the proceeds and bought a brownstone in the West Village, a place with history etched into its bones. It has a small, overgrown garden in the back, a fireplace that crackles on cold nights, not a stage or a state place that is it's been months, been slow, quiet myself. The final piece of it came last week. I was unpacking the last box of old photos, and I found one of Liam and me, taken on our first anniversary. I looked at the smiling man in the picture, the man who had meticulously to destroy me, and I waited for the familiar surge of rage or the sting of, but nothing felt a strange sense of a hollow man in the photo, and for the naive woman who had so desperate hate. It had all burned, and I realized that was my true victory. Not the prison sentence, not the money. It was the moment he lost all power over my heart. The man I thought I married never really existed, but the woman through his betrayal, she's stronger, she's wiser, and I took the smoking ruins of the life and I built a castle much smaller, quieter, but infinitely more real. In my beautiful new bathroom, on a shelf made of reclaimed wood, sits a collection of the most expensive, luxurious shampoos money can buy. Bergamot and cedar, yes, but also oud, vetiver, and citrus. I choose a new scent every day. It's my small, daily ritual, a reminder that sometimes a simple, insignificant change is all it takes to wash a filthy, lying man right out of your life for good. This story, my story, is finally over. It started in a penthouse overlooking Manhattan, but it ends here in a home that's truly mine. I know my voice is just one among millions, and I can't help but wonder where all those other voices are coming from. I'd love to know what city you're listening from as you hear my story come to a close.